this is 11 honors and AP. I mean, it's AP, not 11 honors. This is AP Lit, and we're doing the poem "Convergence of the Twain." And so I want to. We all have a copy. Let me read everything on here, because in the spring, when you get your poem and your fiction passage to write about, and the choice passage is a passage you get to pick a book. It'll look similar to this. So this is what it'll look like. At the top it says question 2. This one happened to be 2. It could have been 1. 3 will always be the book of your choice. All right. It says suggested time 40 minutes. We're not just making that up. That's what they're going to ask you to do. The question counts as 1/3 of the total essay section score. That's complicated, but they're three of the essays, and of course this is just one of those 3. That will be averaged with your multiple choice score, and ultimately to give you a 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 5 being the best. You don't want to get anything less than a 3. All right, so let me read the directions for you. Read the following poem carefully. I always say that. Then, taking into consideration the title of the poem, analyze how the poetic devices convey the reader's attitude toward the sinking of the ship. So underline these things. Title of the poem. Notice where the title of the poem is. It's hard to see because it's right up there next to the prompt. So make sure you spot the title. You should always consider the title. So the Convergence of the Twain is the title. Then it says the purpose of this will be to analyze the devices. We'll talk about devices in a minute. And to analyze the devices that convey the speaker's attitude. Another word for that would be tone, T-O-N-E, or attitude, toward the sinking of the ship. And what are we talking about? We're talking about the Titanic. And how do you know that? Because underneath the title, The Convergence of the Twain, there's the lines on the loss of the Titanic. Everybody knows the Titanic, right? We know that story. There's a little footnote. By the way, look at the back. Flip it over, and you see some footnotes. Please don't ignore anything that any help they give you you're going to need, because they're not going to tell you, for instance, what convergence means. And so for tomorrow, or for Friday rather, we need to do that. So what does it mean when it says the convergence of the Twain? Doesn't even use the word Titanic in the title. What does the word convergence mean? See, they've got you right from the beginning. We're already kind of behind, right? We're kind of behind. We don't even know what the title means. So we've got to somehow figure it out. What's Twain mean? All right, so we're kind of in trouble, so I need to help you with that. When things converge, what do?
Like meshing together.
They come together at one spot. And so that's what a convergence is. It's the coming together of, in this case, how many things? It's the convergence of the twain. Two.
Maybe
Now,
the iceberg in the ship.
it's exactly what it is. That's what the poem is about, the coming together of the iceberg and the ship, the twain. So now you have something to work with. Notice that the word Titanic doesn't appear anywhere in the title nor the book. Nor the poem. All right, then notice the subtitle. Yeah, right here. The subtitle underneath it in parentheses. Please don't ignore parentheses. Most of the time students will ignore that. Like, I'll just skip that because that's what that means. It means to ignore. Please don't let that happen. All right. Notice one other thing. Notice the way it's put together. It's unique. I've never seen a poem like this. Every stanza is numbered, and it's numbered with Roman numerals. Kind of old-fashioned. It could have been 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, just irregular numbers. Could have been A, B, C, D, but it's Roman numerals. There's got to be a reason for that. And notice that gives the appearance of the poem. It's up and down the middle of the page. But the bottom line stands out. So that might be significant. Just pay attention to that. So let me read it to you. Then I'll ask you to do something with it for a few minutes, and then we'll talk about it. So, the convergence of the twain, lines on the loss of the Titanic. In a solitude of the sea, deep from human vanity, and the pride of life that planned her, stilly couches she. Still chambers, late the pyres of her salamandrine fires, cold currents thread, and turn to rhythmic tidal lyres. Over the mirrors meant to glass the opulent, the sea worm crawls, grotesque, slime, dumb, indifferent. Jewels and joy, designed to ravish the sensuous mind, lie lightless, all their sparkles bleared and black and blind. Dim moon-eyed fishes near gaze at the gilded gear and query, what does this vaingloriousness down here? Well, while I was fashioning the creature of cleaving wing, the imminent will that stirs and urges everything, prepared a sinister mate for her, so gaily great, a shape of ice for the time far and dissociate. And as the smart ship grew in stature, nature, and hue, in shadowy, silent distance grew the iceberg too. Alien they seemed to be, no mortal eye could see the intimate welding of their later history, or sign that they were bent by paths coincident on being anon twin halves of one august event, till the spinner of the years said now, and each one hears, and consummation comes, and jars two hemispheres. And it's Thomas Hardy. So you get a title that may not matter to any of you, but if you have it. All right, so what I want you to do, I want you to read through it like we've done a dozen times already, is mark the poem up. Look for devices, try to figure out the attitude of the speaker, and the devices, I mean things like metaphors, personification, simile, symbolism, irony. Look for the imagery, the pictures. Be able to tell what is the circumstance, what's actually going on, what's the organization of the poem, what's being described in what order. The speaker and the audience, that's the main question. So those are things you're going to be looking for. Take about 10 minutes. You're really only going to have 5 minutes on the test, but take a little longer than that. See what you can come up with. out diction, syntax, the way that the lines are. You're trying to figure out the organization of it. Their images, we'll talk about that in a minute, but look for the images that are given. Try to figure out what happens in the poem. Try to figure out the ultimate question, what's the tone of the poem? What's the author's attitude? Again, also look at the rhyme. Are there rhymes or rhythms in the poem? And what about the themes? What's he saying about the Titanic? What you're saying, but the more I see you writing, it's probably a good sign. I mean, you're saying something. You got to have something to write about. All right, I just want to make sure we have time to talk about it. We have about 17 minutes, and that's all we're going to have before we write. The main question is, anybody figured it out? What's the author's or the speaker's attitude toward the sinking of the Titanic? Yes.
Does it feel like it was destined by God to happen?
All right, that's a good start. That's a real good start. So, again, you're going to write about this, so if you can't remember that, write it down. So it's destined by God. What's his attitude toward it because of that? Yeah.
Dislikes the ship itself. He thinks it's an object of human vanity, and he uses specific words: vanity, opulence, sensuousness, and gilded.
All right, so he's blaming human pride and vanity. He uses the word vanity, pride, and vanity again. In the first line, he uses vanity and pride, and then vanity again, or vaingloriousness in number 5. So 3 times he refers to that. And I think we can take that a little further in a minute, but that's a really good start. He's blaming human pride for it. How is the poem, how does he convey that? That's really what you're trying to figure out. How does he, let's look specifically, analyze how the poetic devices convey that attitude. Yes?
Well, we used to show like how the ship and the iceberg is connected. There's a lot of like juxtaposition, because it'll be like, this is what the ship is doing, this is what the iceberg is doing, and it shows
Good.
like the connectedness.
That's a major sort of, if you had to pick one device, contrast or juxtaposition would be it, because you have these series of contrasts, and that being maybe the biggest contrast in the poem. Yeah.
The language that it uses about a ship and the iceberg, it talks about them as a mate, intimate welding, and their consummation. It talks about it in very relationship terms.
Good. mention those words. Those three words all are tied together by the idea of marriage, the most intimate human relationship. So for some reason, he's making that connection.
Between the iceberg and
Yeah,
the ship.
between those two things. Good. Yeah, well, you had something.
I was just gonna say how, like, as Finney was saying, that he focuses on, like, riches of the ship instead of the actual people. He focuses on the vain things that they have and doesn't really on the physical aspect, not the spiritual aspect of all of it.
Did he ever once mention the 1,500 people that were killed? No. So that, in the absence of that, what Tyler is saying is it focuses only on the material things on the ship. Wonder why that is? Yeah, what do you think?
Do you want to answer that? I was gonna do it.
Okay, well, before you answer, what do you think, what's being said, what's an attitude that would never mention the people that died? Yeah, sorry. What would you, how would you describe that attitude? A little cold, isn't it? A little impersonal?
Yeah, I was gonna say careless, like, maybe he just thought like, oh, they should have thought it through, like, it's really, they, like, led themselves to their own doom.
All right, so that's another aspect of the attitude. One is, he's blaming, he's pointing fingers at that, but he doesn't mention the death, so he's not really concerned. Maybe a little, that sounds a little heartless, but, anyway, that's as far as we can take it now. Yeah.
In the first half, at least, the first 5 line sets, each of them is kind of separate and a separate idea, and you can tell that partially by that they each have their own set of rhyme to them. And then they all have, the first 2 lines are kind of showing the human side and the intent of it, and then the third line in each set is showing kind of what it has become now in its corrupted or dilapidated state.
And visually, you can see that. The first 2 lines are indented. That's about the ship itself, and then the next 3 are kind of, its contrast is Davis mentioned earlier, that contrast, that it's in contrast to what was described in the first place. Yeah, juxtaposition. What were you gonna say?
I think he just, like, doesn't care about the people that died because they supported, like, this extreme level of extravagance.
And maybe so, that's a
That was a
good.
bit excessive.
Yeah.
In his opinion.
And it's an excessive kind of pride. Can I point out something that wasn't one of the words I mentioned, but it's the structure. What happens I always ask yourself what happens in the poem. So what happens in the first 5 stanzas?
He describes the shipwreck, so.
The ship has already sunk.
This is pre,
He's back.
and as you can tell when it changes, it says in the very beginning, line 6, well, and then there's a,
Right.
a colon.
Did you see that? That well was a transition word. It showed a shift. You're always looking for shifts. I don't know if you heard Tyler too. Say it again, I like that. This is backwards. He starts at the end and then goes back to the beginning. So the half the poem is like a flashback because we already know the ship is sunk and he describes it.
And
Yeah.
uses very interesting direct juxtaposition of words in those lines with, like in line 2, it talks about the fires and then immediately talks about cold currents and then
Good.
opulence and then grotesqueness. And
Good.
then, jewels designed to ravish the sensuous mind and then its lightness and blind.
And go one more.
One more, it's talking about how the gildedness of, the materials of the ship, and then the fish are talking about it, which also
That-
personification.
And you probably know what gilded means.
Yeah, it's engraved in gold.
Right, but-
Fashioned in a very opulent manner.
Very good. Did you hear that? You got those first, out of the first 5, starting 2, 3, 4, 5. This is something you could point out in your paper and make a point about it. The second stanza has to do with the chambers. The third stanza are the mirrors. The fourth stanza are the jewels, and the fifth stanza the gilded equipment aboard. And by the way, gilded means it's not pure gold all the way through. It's covered with gold.
Inlaid.
Yes, and so, Mark Twain came up with a term for this period, actually prior to the century's turn, but he called it the Gilded Age. In other words, on the outside, it's gold, on the inside, it's something much less valuable. It looks good on the outside. So again, 4 images. That's a literary device. So it uses 4 images, and as several people over here have pointed out, those things are juxtaposed or opposed to each other. The pyres, which are hot. What are those hot? What are those chambers?
Talking about the engine.
That was the engine. But they should be full of fire, but now they're cold with water. What about the mirrors?
They're meant to reflect the opulent, the
Which-
excess, and now they reflect Seymour, which he describes as grotesque, slimy, dumb, and indifferent.
Again, that contrast. The jewels, which are meant to, and you already pointed this out, are bright, but underwater they're lightless. They're blind. And then the fish are looking at the gilded gear, and they just criticize the vaingloriousness, which is another word for vanity.
It's the idea that the gilded gear is sitting on the bottom of the ocean,
Yes.
doing nothing.
Yes. And so you're answering the question. Language, that's a device. Juxtaposition's a device, or contrast. Imagery's a device. So all these things are devices trying to get at the major question: is what is the attitude? Can we add to that attitude after having looked at those first 5? What seems to be the attitude of the fish underwater to the ship? What is their attitude?
Kind of like mocking it.
Exactly, that's exactly what they're doing. And so the first 4 stanzas, in a way, that juxtaposition ends up mocking not just the ship, but the people who put it together and the attitude behind it. That's what he's mocking. So that's a great way to describe the attitude of the author.
Yes, like, is it an overall criticism of like
All right, did you hear that? Say it again. I don't think you hear it.
So, overall criticism of vanity and
Materialism.
Overall criticism of the idea of vanity. The phrase "pride of life," that's from I think it's from the first John, and he says, "Love not the world, neither the things that are of the world, for the things of the world, the lust of the eyes, the lust of the flesh, and the pride of life, these are of the world; they're not of the Father." And so, pride of life refers to that big idea of man's pride and materialism. So the attitude is mocking. You deserve it. It's that God was punishing you. All these things to speak of the attitude of the speaker. Yes, the attitude of the speaker. And there are other smaller things that I think are interesting to point out. That I would let's see. Look at line 8. He calls it a smart ship. The word "smart," we know it means like you got a lot of sense. You're very bright intellectually. But what else does it mean? That's a smart outfit you got on. You ever heard it used that way?
Good looking.
Very attractive, handsome, intelligent. So, both ways, he's mocking the ship because they weren't so smart. And by the way, what is he saying here when he says an iceberg that has practically no form or shape, created by God in the middle of the ocean, can sink the greatest sailing vessel man ever created? All it took was one iceberg. You'd think he could avoid that one iceberg. It's a big ocean out there, right? You'd think one iceberg in the middle of the ocean is going to converge with the biggest ship of all. And of course, it shouldn't have done that damage if they had been maybe better built. But what does that say? That the dumb iceberg versus the smart ship, who wins that?
Dumb iceberg.
The dumb iceberg.
Is it the idea that man cannot overcome nature?
Yeah, or even bigger would be God. It's like the fall of the destruction of Sennacherib. Remember, the glance of the Lord destroyed his entire army. And here, it's fashioned since it's an iceberg. So let me see if there's any other details. The shift, I think that's great. Notice the shift. That's a literary term to look at. The connection with marriage. That's a metaphor. Anybody have it? I'm just looking at all my notes. You did a really good job with that. Anybody have anything else you might be able to use? It does have ROM, but I'm not sure what to make of it. C, vanity, sheet, tires, fires, liars.
They have rhymes, but they're all in kind of little separate sets.
Yeah,
I think it works well for the first half, but it doesn't, because the first half kind of makes them feel like their own individual ideas.
uh-huh.
But in the second half, it's trying to go with a running story, so it doesn't work as well, but it still, functions properly.
Good, and I saw another thing that says the fish are dim moon-eyed fish, but they were smarter, or at least could see easier than the makers of this ship. Remember, it says that nobody could see it coming. I forget where it says that. Yeah, look at number 9, if you turn it back. Alien, they seem to be, no mortal eye could see the intimate welding of later history. So the people that created the ship were not smart enough to see that iceberg or prepare for it. And it didn't take much really to sink it. So, great job. This is gonna be what you need to use. I won't see you tomorrow. So you need to come in Friday with paper and pen like we usually do. And you need to be able to take this very sheet. I don't think I need to give you another one. I'll have some available, a clean one. But you have this one, and I'm gonna ask you to use this one to write your paper. And like I said, it could be a quiz, no more than a quiz. Hopefully they're good enough that that'll make your, I heard some really good things today, so I hope you're paying attention to them.